Let's tank Nythendra in the Emerald Nightmare on heroic difficulty. Now, Nythendra is the first boss we're going to be encountering within the Emerald Nightmare. She's a pretty simple boss. She has 7 whole mechanics on heroic difficulty, which isn't a great deal to actually worry about. And we as tanks only have to deal with 3 or 4 of these mechanics in total. Now, the new mechanic to heroic is called Infested, and players hit with any source of plague damage gain a stack of Infested that inflicts 7,000 plague damage every 2 seconds, and this effect stacks. Now, the effect of Infested gets removed once Nythendra has completed her Heart of the Swarm, which is basically a phase 2 ability, which is after she's finished sleeping, Heart of the Swarm ends. So once she's gone back into phase 1, the debuff clears itself. So the next major mechanic of this fight is Infested Ground, and all this is, it's a patch of green playground on an area where he's done an ability, and it inflicts 327,000 damage every 1.5 seconds to anyone within the area. Now, this for us as tanks isn't too much of a big deal when we're dropping off our debuff, which I'm going to go into next. The damage isn't too bad, especially if you use a minor cooldown, because you're going to be wanting to drop your debuff within this area. For DPS, however, they shouldn't really be touching this too often, if at all, because of the other mechanics that are going on, like Infested and so on. So there's 3 mechanics that create this bad ground. They are Infested Breath, so all what's going to happen is the dragon's going to turn at a random raid member. This can't be tanks, however, so it can be your healers, your ranged DPS, or your melee DPS, and he's going to breathe towards them. And from the breath to the outside of the room, it's going to create patches of this bad ground, which you don't want to stand in. The other mechanic that's going to create its rot, which can affect any other ranged member apart from the tanks, and they're just going to get a debuff. I think with a 30-man raid, we was getting 3 of these debuffs, and they just need to run out and drop it in good spots, preferably near other bad areas of ground, and these players are also going to be pulsing damage to anyone around them. So the last thing that can happen is Volatile Rot, which is a tank mechanic. So let's go a bit more in detail about this, since this is a tank guide. So Volatile Rot is going to affect the tank who is currently tanking Nythendra, and it'll inflict 2 million plague damage to all allies after 8 seconds. But the further away the tank is from the rest of the raid, the less damage they will take. So in addition to this, we're also going to drop several patches of Infested Ground. I think it was 3 patches when I was looking at it last night. So it's not too many, but the general idea of this is the main tank wants to get the off tank to taunt off them so they can run out, and the boss doesn't obviously move position. You don't want the boss running around in this fight, and you want to get as far away from the raid as possible. So say the raid's on the left side of the boss, you want to go all the way to the right side, up against the wall, and blow up your Volatile Rot mechanic, so that the raid's taking the least amount of damage. You need to be really aware of this mechanic, as it's pretty much the only main tank mechanic and the tank swap mechanic of this fight. So it's pretty much either make a weak aura or make sure your debuffs are large enough so you notice it straight away. There's also an animation for it, is for the off tank to know when to taunt, is the tank will just get a bit bigger and glow a bit red. So that's like if you're looking at the game, obviously you will be, is that's what you want to be watching out for on the other tank. They'll get a bit bigger, they'll get like a bit red and glowy, and that's when you want to be taunting, and that tank needs to be aware that he's got bigger, got the debuff, and he needs to be getting out. So the way we did this is we had the melee actually running to the same side, like running through the boss onto the same side as the tank was. So we wanted the melee ended up going like tank side, so say they go to the head side, and we'd go all the way to the back left corner, as I'll be showing you right now. Boop. And yeah, that's how we managed to handle that kind of overlap crossover. Sometimes it'd get a bit iffy, so you can always chuck say you're on a paladin, you can always chuck a sack on the melee if you feel like it. But for the most part, they can use like a small defensive if they think they're too close to you. So when Nythendra hits 0 energy, she's going to go into the Heart of the Swarm phase, which is basically, she looks like she's sleeping on the ground, and she's going to spawn a load of insects across the room. And over 20 seconds, her influence, as it said, causes an insect to swell and cast Burst of Corruption 3 times before dying. Now, Burst of Corruption is going to inflict 851,000 plague damage to all players within 8 yards of the exploding maggot. In addition, the toxic residue increases the damage of burst of corruption by 25% for 5 seconds, and this effect can stack. So basically, if you're getting hit by this, the next one's either going to one-shot you or like nearly going to kill you. So you don't want to be even close to these maggots, especially on heroic, because you've got other things ticking you down. So the goal here is there's going to be white maggots on the floor and black flies. You want to stand near the black flies and away from the white maggots. Basically, rule of thumb for me was stand on top of black flies at all times while dodging the green stuff on the ground. Don't stand anywhere near the white maggots if possible. And if you do, always be looking at your feet. Don't worry about your DPS. Just always keep an eye on the black flies and where they are. And if you can be on top of one, be on top of one. If it turns into a white maggot, get away from it and find a new black fly. That's pretty much how you handle this phase. And always prioritize this mechanic over DPSing. If you need to stop DPSing just to get like that extra bit of movement, please do so. Don't be afraid to stop DPSing. This fight's not a DPS race. The enrage time is huge on it. I think it's like 8 minutes or something. You got like 4, 5 phases of this to do. So just stay alive and don't worry about your damage too much. So after this phase, we go back into phase 1 and the fight pretty much repeats until the boss dies. There's nothing really much more to talk about. Maybe about the range positioning. What I'll be doing is rotating clockwise around the boss. Well, that's how we did it anyway. They rotate clockwise around the boss on every breath. Now, each phase 1 has 3 breaths, so they're going to be moving 3 times. So the only reason you really need to know this is because of your volatile rot debuff. So you need to know where the range is so you can obviously get out and be on the opposite side of them. So say they're on the left side, you're going to go to the right. If they're on the right, you're going to go to the left. If they're at the back of the room, you want to keep it to the left or right front towards the boss head. And your other tank needs to know to use a cooldown there because he's going to be obviously a lot closer to you. Now, when tanking the boss and you're waiting for the volatile rot debuff to go on yourself, you need to be rotating your active mitigation cooldowns just to reduce any damage coming to you, putting your ignore pains up, putting your shield blocks up, and rotating cooldowns constantly because the boss does hit quite hard. It's not obviously as hard as say Ursoc, but she does hit pretty hard. So don't be afraid to use your minor cooldowns, and also be aware of when the volatile rot debuff is going to explode off the other tank, because you definitely want to be rotating at least a 20% damage reduction cooldown on yourself, because this is when you're going to take a bit of a spike damage. That, on top of infested, is just going to tick you down slowly. You're going to be always hovering around 50 to 75% health. Don't ever be afraid to call for an external on this fight, because the other DPS in the raid shouldn't really be using it unless, of course, they need to, say, for the melee, as I've already explained before. Anyway, I hope this guide does help you guys. It is a bit of a hard boss for a starting fight, especially on heroic, compared to, say, Hellfire Assault in the past. It is a pretty fun fight. It will get boring after doing, say, 100 kills of it, but for a starting encounter, really good. I do hope this video helped you. Give me a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you on my next guide.